The one I've got is Helen Sappington. She's not doing well. Brand indicated that they're going to be setting her up on hospice some this afternoon. Hopefully she'll pull out of it. She's done that once before, but not doing well. Helen Sappington. Janice Fleming.
Rachel Daniels' son died. His name is Mickey Wheeler. The funeral is in Ripley today at 3.
You said Ricky. What was the name? Mickey
Wheeler.
Mickey
Rachel
Wheeler.
needs to be in our prayers too. She's still having treatment and difficulty where she broke her leg.
Remember Rachel Daniel, her family, and her as well as recovery. Lost her son, Mickey Wheeler, right? Any other prayer requests?
Michelle Holcomb will be going from the Boonville Hospital to Creekside Manor in Saltillo tomorrow. That will be her new residence.
Michelle Holcomb moving into some assisted living. We need to remember Tim Nichols' family. Their little girl or their child has hand, foot, and mouth disease. So they're struggling with that this morning. So remember them. Prayers of Thanksgiving.
I've been going through tests a bunch down at Birmingham, and this week all they can find is ulcer. Okay.
This week they found what?
All they could find was an ulcer, and they treated it with medication, so everything's clear.
Good deal. Amen. Just going to treat him with medication.
I guess you should my pacemaker are doing.
Yeah, Adrian's got his pacemaker in, got his sling off today. He said he's feeling, he told me last week he was already feeling better from it. And it's great what a little bit of blood flow everywhere will do for you.
Talking about a 1K race,
You're going to do a 1K race?
I did.
Might do it. All right. Is he going to be racing K or what's? How does that work?
I just heard a little of it.
I think K'd give him a run for his money. Anybody else?
I want to give the Lord the praise for helping me yesterday. First time cleaning my house.
Great.
This house since my leg.
That's great. Julius Lee Wells still in recovery. Still, where's she at?
She will return home on the 17th.
Okay. I heard somebody talking over here.
My sister Ann Young moved to living in
Okay.
It's a blessing that she's made so much progress, but it is an adjustment period for her. She seems satisfied there.
Ann Young, and where's she at?
It's in Amory.
In Amory.
I forget the name of the book.
She's in an assisted living facility in Amory.
Remember the Bodwell family in Iuka? Their little girl, she's sick. She was swimming and they got struck by lightning.
Oh.
And it went through her heart and she's having problems with arrhythmias. They're trying to get it off. They're taking her to LaBonner, I think.
Glidewell family, the little girl was swimming, struck by lightning. Where lightning went through her heart. So, going up to La Bonner, you said?
Yeah, somewhere.
Going somewhere.
I know they're transferring her from Magnolia.
The Glidewell family. If there's nobody else, we'll go to our Father in prayer. Bow with me. Father in heaven, we thank you today that we are able to come before your throne to give you honor and praise that you're due, Father, that we are able to come together and to assemble and to worship with one another and to build each other up and to help hold each other accountable and help each other through this walk of life, Father. Father God, we want to give you the glory for each and every blessing that is provided, Father, because we know that you are the great giver, Father, and we also know that you are the great healer and that you are the great comforter and that these names that we're about to list off, that you can provide what they need, and Lord, help us to find opportunities to be your body, Father, that we can show your love to them. Father God, we lift up to you Helen Sappington, Janice Fleming, Rachel Daniel, and her family with the loss of her son, Mickey. We pray for Michelle Holcomb, the Nichols family, Ann Young and her transition, and for the Glidewell family for the recovery of their little girl. Father God, we are thankful for good news that we received, for the answered prayers of so many of your children, Father, and we want to recognize some of those now. We lift up and thank you for Chopper Taylor and the good reports he received, for Adrian Edge's improved health. Thank you for Miss Roberts and her new abilities to be able to do things that she hasn't been able to done recently. We're thankful for the continued recovery of Julie Lee Wells, and she'll be looking to come home soon. And Lord God, we are thankful for the improvements for Ann Young that allow her to be in a better facility for her, Father. Be with us today as we open up your word, as we seek to learn more, and as we seek to approach your throne properly when we worship you. Father God, we love you and we praise you. It's in Christ's name that we pray. Amen. Sometimes I get ahead of myself. We usually have a song, don't we? I think it's 739, God's Wonderful People. Yes, ma'am. Donnie, you up there? There is on that far right yellow dial, push that up a little bit. Up. Are you able to hear better now? No? Okay. Is Randy around? Has anybody else got a hearing device that's not working? Anybody else got one on? Okay. Kevin, can you look in that closet and see if there's any more hearing devices in there? There we go. 739, we'll sing the first and second verse, starting off here with the chorus. We'll sing the chorus, verse 1, verse 2, and then back to chorus. Let's all sing together. I love the thrill that I feel when I get together with God's wonderful people. Love the thrill that I feel when I get together with God's wonderful people. What a sight just to see all the happy faces, praising God in heavenly places. What a thrill that I feel when I get together with God's wonderful people. Do we know that one? No. Okay, then we'll just skip that time. All right.
Never heard it.
All right, we'll just read over the word. We've been talking about assembling and being with one another. Verse 1 says, "Oh, what joy his love affords when we meet in one accord, and we lift our hearts in praise unto the Lord. There's no place I'd rather be than with the ones who've been set free. I'm so glad I'm in God's great big family." Verse 2 says, "It can be just anywhere, 2 or 3 are gathered there, that the Spirit of the Lord will be there too. There's no fellowship so sweet, there's no thrill that can compete with the thrill I feel whenever God's children meet." I love the thrill that I feel when I get together with God's wonderful people. Love the thrill that I feel when I get together with God's wonderful people. What a sight just to see all the happy faces, praising God in heavenly places. What a thrill that I feel when I get together with God's wonderful people. Do we have that thrill? Do we have that? We should. We should. We have a great opportunity when we assemble together. We're going to finish out, as all of y'all know, we've been talking about out of this book, Worship, Bowing at the Feet of God by Ted H. Waller. And our lesson, or our topic that we were in the middle of last week was the assembly and group worship. And how when we come together, it's a time of focus. It's a focus away from what? Our everyday lives, so that we can come together and we have this specific time to do what? Focus on who? On God. And so I gave you an example last week, and I wanted to clarify it. Sometimes whenever you're teaching, you don't always read all your notes. We talked about when we have our jobs. And sometimes when we have our jobs, we have to take our focus specifically off of maybe spiritual matters, and we focus in on our job, our task at hand, right? You know, we talked about maybe a surgeon. I want my surgeon focused on his job at hand. As an accountant, you want me focused on doing your taxes. Now, does that mean we completely devoid ourselves of God? No. We can still do our jobs in a godly manner. And that's how we continue to give God the honor and God the praise in our occupation. So I wanted to make that clarification to make sure that that was understood. It's not that we have these boxes and I'm either in this box or I'm in this one. They do overlap. It's just our focus when we come together to worship should always be on God, and we shouldn't have those divisions. Something else I want you to think about when we talk about assembly. What's something different we've done in this class since I've started teaching? We have all moved back here. What's your thoughts on that? Being together. Is it better? Is it worse? Better. Why is it better? We're grouped together. You can hear other comments. Any other thoughts over here? Gives an opportunity for us to actually be together. It's like we're truly assembling and not just being in the same building together. There's a difference. If we were all spread out and sitting one person to a pew, how would the singing be? If we know the song. Let me clarify that first. Not too good. When we have singing nights, you see a lot of people, they squish up to the front because they all want to be together. They want to assemble together so that the singing is better. Well, when we assemble together, we should be close to our brothers and sisters. Whenever Jesus was teaching and the four friends brought the paralytic to him, was there any room in that house? Why not? They squeezed as many people in there as they could. They were side by side, shoulder to shoulder. They wanted to hear. They wanted to be a part of the event, and so to get to Jesus, they had to find their own way. But we should use that as an example when we're assembling together. Don't always think about, this is my spot, and well, my friends have since moved on, and so they're, feel free to move. I remember Aaron doing a lesson one day about people having their spots. Find your brothers and sisters and go step out of that comfort zone. He thought about mentioning us. He told me after the fact, and he didn't know how to classify us. Back at that time, we could have been called nomads because me and Leanne, we'd try to sift around and shift around. But as we've had more and more kids, it's been better to be there next to Jim and Janita to help have a little bit, few more referees during service. But take this opportunity when we are in this four walls to get closer to your brothers and sisters. I'm amazed sometimes at how what I'm teaching I hear it coming across other locations. Last week we had Connection Sunday, and I thought it just fit right in with us talking about assembly. Anybody else feel that? because a lot of what Greg said that day kind of overlapped with what we're studying about here, about being a part of something, about being connected, about being brothers and sisters and getting to know one another and building those relationships. And so, it's good to know that we're studying that here, but also in just the topic of worship, our young people are studying that. In Luke's class, they're studying about worship throughout the summer. And so it's good to know that what we're studying here, we can talk about with our kids or our grandkids. And I'm going to talk about Dorcas for just a moment, or Tabitha. Last week, Shannon's class studied about her, I believe, or it may have been Leanne's. I don't recall. But it's amazing how we have these opportunities if we just look for them. Flip over to Acts chapter 9. And we're going to talk real quick about those relationships that we build when we're part of the family. Acts chapter 9. This is a short lesson here, and there's so much more than that we could get into, but we're going to focus on just a couple of quick things. In verse 36 of chapter 9, it says, "Now there was in Joppa a disciple named Tabitha, which translated means Dorcas. She was full of good works and acts of charity. In those days she became ill and died, and when they washed her, they laid her in an upper room." So what do we know about her so far? She was full of what? Good works. Meaning she was a faithful member, right? Did she keep it to herself? She shared it. Let's see what impact she had. Let's look down in verse 39. "So Peter rose and he went with them, and when he arrived, they took him to the upper room, and all the widows stood beside him weeping and showing tunics and other garments that Dorcas made while she was with them." So what was her occupation? What was her talents? What was she able to do? She was a seamstress. And to whose glory did she use that occupation? To God's. And who was there with her, or who was there at her viewing? What kind of women? Widows. Pure and undefiled religion is what? To visit the fatherless and widows in their afflictions. She was living her religion. She was living her worship. And the people that she touched on more than just providing a need. We have that opportunity when we assemble to provide needs for our brothers and sisters, to provide what they have or what they need. We have to care. We have to build true relationships with one another. Not out of obligation, but out of love. And when we worship together, we get a greater experience of that love with one another, that relationship with one another. Talked about last week kind of corresponded well with this, and I talked about also our new kind of ministry for that Brother Mooney's heading up. We need each other, and we need service opportunities, and so those activities help make sure we assemble, help us to build those relationships out of these four walls. The more we build those, the more important this assembly is together. It's better to worship with our friends and family and those that we know and that we love, because I want you to help me and I want to help you. Brother Greg talked about it a little bit last week. Based on research, if a member's not connected, somebody new comes along, and if they're not connected with the church in a ministry, what's going to happen? They're going to eventually leave because they're not a part of the family. They haven't been brought into the fold. Our author here mentions that within 6 months, if they're not put in some kind of share group or a ministry, that they will drop away. But if they're a part of that, if they're a part of a ministry, then the assembly is important to them because they want to be there to continue to build those relationships. So the key on all this is get involved. Get involved. It's not just our new people. This is all of us. Because the first thing that happens whenever we start slipping away is, well, I'm not needed in that, so I just take a step back. Start doing a little bit less. Start doing a little bit less. Well, I'm not invested in the congregation, so my giving may go away. And eventually we're going to step away. James talks a lot about works. Let's move over to James chapter 1. Guys, if you haven't noticed, I'm kind of a stream of conscious teacher, and our writer here is too, so you may feel like, well, why are we going off over here? Well, it comes back. It usually comes back. James 1:22. Be doers of the word, not hearers only, deceiving yourself. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks blindly at his natural face in a mirror. For he looks at himself and goes away at once, forgets what he is like. We have to be doers in order to be a part of the congregation, in order to make our time of assembly important, to make us improve our worship. Move over to James 2:14. What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can that faith save him? If a brother or sister is poorly clothed, lacking in food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, be warmed and filled. Wait, that sounds like what Brother Jonathan preached about on Wednesday. Bless your heart. Remember that? Do we care enough about our brothers and sisters to provide for their needs? You believe that God is one, you do well. Even the demons believe and shudder. It's all tied together. We will get more out of worship in our assembly and our joining together if we are more active in carrying out God's will. And hopefully in our time together, our worship together wants us to do more service, to do more of God's will. And so it goes around. It should reinforce itself. But if we ever let one fail or one start dropping off, it kind of breaks off the cycle and we get weaker. And we get weaker. And we get weaker. So assembly is important. Service shows our heart. It shows our faith. We need to abound in the work of the Lord as we've been studying. If we're abounding in the work of the Lord, our worship will be better. Our services will be acceptable. Say, Jeremy, that's all well and good, but how do we do that? This is a problem for any size congregation, whether large or small. What are some unique challenges with a large congregation? Just fitting in, finding a spot, because especially for somebody new, fitting in, finding a spot, being welcomed. It's getting people involved, but also organizing them to touch as many people as possible. If anybody has a desire to serve, I have plenty of spots upstairs for either the soundboard, PowerPoint, or video. I'll be glad to teach you. There's always opportunities if you're looking for one. Everybody will find you a spot. But I agree, giving everybody an opportunity to work. A lot of it's organization. A lot of it's organization, but with a purpose. What are we trying to accomplish? How did Jesus feed the 5,000? That's a pretty large congregation. That's over 10 times as big as we are. How did he feed them? He did what? He sat them down in groups. Put them into manageable groups, into ways that their needs could be met, where it's a daunting task if we try to eat the whole elephant, right? We have to do it one bite at a time. But we can accomplish this as large congregations, but we have to be purposeful. One of the quotes in his book says, "The spiritual life of each Christian is dependent on the development of meaningful relationships with other Christians." I feel that's so true. The whole purpose of us having assembly is to be there to encourage and build one another up. We've talked about, probably in our first lesson, about the various meeting groups and the various times that they gathered, and how we probably wouldn't recognize that as an organized worship service. Do you recall some of the things that they would talk about in Acts whenever they would group together, whenever they would come together when faced with a challenge? You remember some of those things that we talked about? Talked about evangelism. They talked about the giving and taking care of needs and the benevolence needs. They were teaching, learning, correcting. They were carrying out Christ's commands. But it wasn't just a one-sided conversation, was it? Their meetings were probably more similar to our Sunday school classes, where it was a dialogue, a conversation going back and forth, where they would discuss one way or the other. And we'll talk later when we get into the next chapter about how they approached that. So they were discussing things on a personal level. This is how God's acting in my life. This is the opportunities I've had. When we're assembled together, do we share those? When we assemble together, do we share how God's worked in our lives? Share the opportunities that we've had to serve Him? Talk about how we can serve them. We talked about last week, stirring up one another, considering ourselves about doing acts or doing good works. Do we do that? Now, I tell you, I'm stepping on my toes just as much as anybody else. But I want you to think about, reconsider why we're in these four walls, why we are gathered together. The disciples of this time, they could only accomplish their goals by meeting together, by discussing. Acts 2:44 says they gave to each other as needed. And so they were providing for the financial needs of each other. We only know what those are as if we're together, each contributing what they had. Doing the Lord's work gives power to the congregation, gives power and meaning to our worship, and the acts that we do together, and we receive guidance when we meet together. Who attends an assembly? Name some of the groups that are here, or that'll be here in the next hour. You got families. You got strong members. We got children. We've got weak members. We have visitors, people that are lost, families from out of town. We have college students. We have people that will give financially of their means. We have some that won't. So we are an assembly of varying backgrounds, of varying differences. We'll have rich, we'll have poor. We'll have those that have a job, those that don't. Have those that are retired and those that are studying. And so we're a diverse group. When we come together, our daily walk with God is expressed, or a lack thereof is going to be expressed in worship. Heard about the 80-20 rule? Where 80% of the work's done by 20 people. Hopefully our worship isn't an 80-20, where 80% of the worship is only done by 20% of the congregation. hopefully we're demolishing that rule where we can have striving for 100% worship with 100% of the people. But it goes back to just not going through the motions. This congregation can be sort of like the Israelites. We talked about that early on. After those generations and generations after they crossed the Red Sea, what happened to their faith in God? It can diminish because that fervor kind of went away. It wasn't finding it for the first time. There's many members here who have been in the Lord's church their whole life. And so we take it for granted sometimes. And then you have somebody that's been sinful and they know they've been sinful, they approach worship differently, right? Hopefully we all approach it the same way. We don't let the repetitive and the things that we know and things that we've always done disrupt us. We're a 100-year-old plus congregation. Some of you can go back generations and generations of people that have been in this congregation. But it's your personal walk, it's your personal worship is what matters. Group worship is difficult with all the varying personality types. We all have different walks in life, and leaders in the congregation have to set the pace. We have to set the pace and the direction for the congregation, and we have to call all to a higher ground. And I think we strive to do that. But it's something we can't just put on autopilot. Our worship should touch people. If you flip over to 1 Corinthians 14. First Corinthians 14:24. It's talking specifically about being in worship and being orderly and how something can be good but not. Verse 24 says, "But if all prophesy, an unbeliever or outsider enters, he is convicted by all, he is called to account by all." Verse 25, "The secrets of his heart are disclosed, and so falling on his face, he will worship God. An outsider will worship God and declare that God is among you." Would somebody say that when they come in and worship with us? Hopefully. Hopefully. He will worship God and declare that He's among you. Hopefully we're there. Hopefully we're doing that. Assembly is so important. There's 168 hours in the week, and the elders set aside about 4 hours a week for us to come together. Just 2% of your week is spent in these walls. Our worship and our assembly has to be outside these walls too. Because if we're only in here and that's our only walk, for God it's not enough. Our worship, our walk affect each other. Group assemblies help us keep our walk on track. And we have to examine our worship and make sure that it's meeting the needs, it's meeting the heart of those assembled, that it renews our commitment to the New Testament, and we have to examine our quote-unquote practices or our rituals, making sure that it's not just going through the motions, making sure that what we're doing brings us closer to God. Any thoughts so far as we kind of change direction? Any comments?
This is something that I think about a lot. And I can remember when I was a young person, a lot of you can too, that we had more seating than we had people.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember at that time, the elders actually closed off some of the benches on the back of the building that this was the same time. Do y'all think that it's a possibility that it hinders our worship because we have so many places that people can scatter in and we're not really, yeah.
I think anybody else feel free to comment, but just as we push this class back, people have said that being together is a positive. And so I agree with you that doing something like that wouldn't be a negative action.
Well, like for us in particular, we can't, we're like most people, we tend to sit in one spot.
Mhm.
And we sort of sit, there a few rows back on the right side, and I can look to the middle and lock our work person. And they're like multiple rows where they're like, nobody.
Mhm.
And I just can't believe that we can do that. You know, and to, you know, to look at people's drugs and
Mhm.
make our work successful.
Yeah.
And then would be awesome if we could all
Mhm.
kind of get together.
Our singing on singing nights could be just as good during a worship service if we all came close to one another. Mhm. Mhm. Elders, y'all take a note of that? I don't disagree. I appreciate it. Any other thoughts? Any other comments? I don't know if you know, but there were pews that went further back. Those have been taken up and put into storage, so it gives us more space in the back for fellowship. So now I'm not sure any members noticed that when that happened, 8 years ago? Just take out a few more.
I just, I've often wondered why, when we have plenty of space in the lower level of the auditorium, people would use the balcony. It's always surprising to me that people would gravitate to the balcony. Maybe there's, family situations where you might need that, but
Mhm.
typically I would think you'd want to be with the family.
I agree. I was going to make a comment similar to that a lot of us have our spots in the pew, and I know that whenever we started having children, there weren't open spots under the balcony to be able to run and go if we had a need to step out. And part of that's because we have families that have grown up back there, and so that's their spot, and they didn't necessarily give one way or the other. And so I think the balcony can be used, has been used some for those people in those type of needs. But I agree. Let's be a part of the family. Let's get closer together, and let's be intentional, and let's have a purpose on why we're doing something.
I can also, I mean, we're kind of sadly used to say that to leave what to that key, for the families with small children that needed to get back there so they could get in, or particularly when you said,
Yeah.
you know, sometimes you don't feel well, and you need to be able to get in there.
Mhm.
Well, if you ever intended to do something like that, you would sure have to set aside how many people are here at worship Sunday, people put it on. How many people are here for Sunday? If we fixed it where that would be our congregation, you know what I mean? You got 100 people left, because there's 100 people that's not in the
Well, I think the intent of the comments was doing something to make our worship and be closer together with one another. We can always expand it as need be, because hopefully the closer we are together, the more people will feel a part of the congregation if they were visiting, and not just in this pew by themselves, because they would be maybe forced to be with another, and you'd have a better opportunity to meet with them. I will say this, that, and we'll move on. When we have the Freed Hardman Singers chorale come in, they don't sing underneath the balcony whenever they get started to march in. They line up under the balcony, and then they start singing when they come in. The singing just from here forward is so much better, so much fuller, not because of people singing or not singing, but just literally structurally, underneath the balcony is not designed for the beauty of the voice. It is just designed to be a ceiling.
There's no singing echo back here.
It doesn't reverberate. The acoustics are completely different. So I encourage you, if you do sit under the balcony, just sit here forward, and the singing will be better. I promise you. I promise you. And she says it's cooler underneath the balcony. All right, we're going to move on. Edification, that's our next topic. We've been studying and thinking about worship from an inward perspective, where we have looked at how we approach it and how we are to come before God. We are to be brought into His presence, and that in that mentality. Now we're looking at, well, what are the outward effects of our worship? How are other people affected? And our topic is going to be to edify. What does to edify mean? Build up. It's a construction term is the background of this. But to build up, to continue to improve, to build to completion. So if we're not edifying, what's the opposite to build up? To tear down. So we're either building up in our worship, or we're tearing down. Now, that's not me internally. That is what I'm doing to everyone else. Have you ever thought about it that way? Is what I'm doing, is it building up somebody, or is it tearing them down? That's the two choices we have. And you say, well, I'm not doing anything. I'm not doing anything that would cause somebody to, well, a lack of attendance is a way that you might be tearing somebody down. A lack of singing might be a way of tearing down. A lack of giving might be a way of tearing down. Not focusing at the right time might be a way of tearing down. Worship and assemblies for bringing God into our consciousness and expressing our awe and adoration to Him. That should be our focus when we come in here together. And if it's performed properly from the heart, a direct byproduct is going to be edification of the worshipers. How are you edified in the congregation when we come together to worship? How are you built up? The study. So it builds upon our knowledge, on our faith. Our faith is built up.
Song selection is always important.
Song selection is important.
Just being around people that believe like you do.
Building around being around fellow believers.
You're all kinds of different ideas, things, people doing all sorts.
It reinforces your own beliefs. Mm-hmm. I got a few others. We find help when we have need. That's a way that we're able to build one another up. We can receive instructions, have the opportunity to share our goods, our experiences, God's blessing. Love reaching out. Our faith grows. How can worship be non-edifying? I can just say opposite of what Jim said. The song selections could be something that kind of tears you down. If I, as a song leader, pick all new songs, then I'm not reaching one of those demographic groups we talked about. If I sing all old songs, well, then I'm missing another group. So I have to be aware of that. So song selection can build up or tear down.
It's the same thing with the curriculum that the adults are going through, the kind of sermons that we're hearing.
Okay.
Is it something that we really need? Is it something that touches my heart?
Mm-hmm. I know some people use the bulletins and fill out the check sheets and their outlines. I don't necessarily do that. personally, because often I'm just looking to fill in the blanks, and I don't always pay the right attention. But I always know when we filled in the last blank. Is our time of listening to Greg more focused on, well, he filled in the last blank, we're ready to do the next thing? Because if I'm a visitor, I'm going, what was that? Or are we hungry for the Word? There may be certain things that you say, this builds me up, tears me down. That's, everybody's different. Everybody's got their own preferences, what they like, what they don't like. Doesn't mean what you don't like doesn't build up something for somebody else. But remember, we're here to build up our brothers and sisters. And so our actions and how we approach worship will affect them. I'm just barely touching this topic. We'll go ahead and get into this. The background of this. In 1 Corinthians, we're already in 1 Corinthians 14. 11 through 14 deals with various acts of worship and the assembling together of those members there in Corinth. And they dealt with their dress, the Lord's Supper, spiritual gifts, being a part of the body. They discussed love in chapter 13 and 14. They talk about prophecy and tongues. And all these weren't necessarily directions. Some of these were compliments on how they were doing it, and some of them were condoning how they were doing it. And it all comes down to this linchpin on 1 Corinthians 14, verse 26. What then, brothers, when you come together, each one has a hymn, a lesson, a revelation, a tongue, or an interpretation. The last part of 26, let all things be done for building up. I want that verse to sink into you. Does it say let some things be done for building up? All things. Has that stuck out to you? Let all things. It's not just the people that are leading worship. It's all the members too. Let all things be done to build up. In chapter 14, we saw that they were trying to outdo one another with their spiritual gifts, with their tongues, and they thought it was more important because they had this gift of tongues to be able to share the gift of tongues. But what were they lacking? They were lacking an interpreter. And so, if I gave you this same lesson today, and I did it in Spanish, if I could speak Spanish, would it have built you up? It would not have built you up one bit. It could have been the exact same thing word for word, but it would have been worthless because nobody would understand a single word I said. Some of you might. Let all things be done to be built up. And we'll finish off with verse 22 through 25 here. It says, the tongues are a sign not for believers but for unbelievers, while prophecy is a sign not for unbelievers but for believers. If therefore the whole church comes together and all speak in tongues and outsiders, unbelievers enters, will they not say that you are out of your minds? But if all prophesy and an unbeliever or outsider enters, he is convicted by all. He is called to account by all. The secrets of his heart are disclosed, and so falling on his face, he will worship God and declare that God is among you. Are our acts to build one another up, are they having our visitors and the people that come in to believe us say, God is among you? We're going to continue our thoughts on edification next week. You might think, how can we talk about edification for a whole nother week? Guys, it's amazing what you can get into whenever you dive into a subject. Thank you for your comments, and we'll